Today on the Unofficial Shopify podcast, we're going to talk buying and selling businesses, ideally Shopify stores in this case. Because in a recent episode, Drew Sanaki told us, hey, the thing I wish I knew was buy a business if you can, because that's the shortcut as opposed to building a business. There's years of figuring stuff out that you could just skip when you buy a business. And if you have built a business or acquired and scaled a business, certainly you think about, wow, what it would be like if you could get that big payday of selling a business. And so we've got someone with us today who's going to talk us through it, who's going to talk us through the ins and outs from his perspective, because we're joined by Gregory Elfrink from Empire Flippers, who has helped sell quite a few businesses, many of them Shopify stores, to date. I'm your host, Kurt Elster.
Check nasty.
And this is the Unofficial Shopify podcast. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. It's always a pleasure being on someone's podcast with a soundboard.
For people who aren't familiar with Empire Flippers, what is it?
Yeah, so my 30-second elevator pitch is we're the largest curated marketplace in the world when it comes to buying and selling online businesses. So we've sold affiliate sites, e-commerce stores, SaaS businesses, you name it, even weirder businesses like Kindle publishing businesses, which are more esoteric than those, I'd say. But yeah, I've been with the company for roughly 8 years, a little over 8 years now. And when I first started, our biggest business we ever sold was like $150,000. And that was like the big business, right? I remember my CEO telling me like, it all changes at this valuation. And I think I told you offline, but I think it was about 2 months ago, we just sold a $13 million Shopify store. So times have changed.
So what's your background? How'd you get here? Where'd you come from? What led you to Empire Flippers?
Yeah. So I grew up in Alaska and I got into the oil field and worked there on many different rigs across many different oil fields. And I did not like it, was not a fan. So I taught myself internet marketing and I had all these Halliburton notebooks that they would give me. It's like one of the perks. They gave me free notebooks. I had all these ideas of different ways of learning internet marketing, different funnels from the stuff I was learning from like YouTube and forums and courses and stuff like that. So I eventually got out of the oil field, obviously. I learned internet marketing and originally I joined EF as just the guy who wrote the blogs. And now fast forward all this time, I'm the head of marketing.
It is quite the journey.
When I was working in the oil field, I had this like gritty determination where I just like, you know what, everything I've tried on the internet has failed. But one thing I am really good at is writing fast. And I know all the SEOs of the world absolutely hate creating content. And like I write poetry and books for fun. So like all my other internet marketing ventures had failed at that point. So I just went into all the Facebook groups I could find with SEOs and undercut every single writer. I was charging like half a cent a word. And that's how I really got my portfolio started in the internet marketing world. And I remember one of my clients, I was writing all these plumbing in Ohio articles for him. He's an SEO agency in Ohio, right? And he found I was still working in the oil field. I was like, yeah, man, like after my 12, 13-hour shift, I go to the one part of the room in the camp where the Wi-Fi connection connects with the rest of the world from the Arctic. And I write your plumbing in Ohio articles. He's like, man, I'd be so burned out if I were you. Like, dude, I've been burned out for years. Doesn't mean you get to stop. You still got to pay your bills. So that was how I started. And very funny, later on in my career in EF, I started meeting a lot of the gurus in the space. And they would have these sites or stores that they wanted to sell with me. And I knew the stores because I wrote all the content. So they had hired this content agency for themselves who had undercut themselves by farming it out to me. So I actually wrote all of these people's stores and content sites that eventually ended up selling their businesses, which I thought was quite funny.
Small world.
Yeah, it really is.
So in your experience, what are of the stores that have sold well on Empire Flippers, of the Shopify businesses, are there commonalities there to the stores that tend to sell well?
When it comes to selling a business, like The key is how do you de-risk it? And how you de-risk it is by looking at what are the critical points of failure in this business. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, let's say I'm a Shopify store and 100% of my traffic is coming from Facebook ads, which is quite common with a lot of people in e-commerce. Like all their ads are meta ads, right? Instagram and Facebook. So what happens if your Facebook ad account gets banned and you can never get it back? Like, well, you don't really have a business, or at least not for very long. So you want to diversify multiple traffic sources, right? And ideally, you want to diversify with multiple products, where it's not just one product that you're selling. Now, you can get away with one product. I was just talking to a lady a few weeks ago. She has like a $3-4 million Shopify store with one product. And that's great, but I wouldn't recommend it because it makes everything a lot riskier. So she would be in a much better position if she was more than just organic traffic, which is what she's getting right now, and by adding like TikTok ads, like TikTok Shop that is blowing up right now, her own meta ads, and she would be much better off having multiple SKUs, and that also increases the average order value, right? So a lot of the stuff that we do as entrepreneurs to try to make our own businesses safer from our perspective is actually some of the good stuff that buyers also want, and they're willing to pay a premium for that.
So when someone's trying to get listed, they want to sell their business, they want to list it on Empire Flippers or for sale somewhere, what do you think are some of the challenges in getting prepped for that? What are the stumbling blocks?
So the biggest stumbling block, and this comes from a lot of experience. I've sold over 2,000 businesses at this point over the years, and the most common stumbling block is really the seller themselves. And what I mean by that is not like some personal development woo-woo type of stuff, but instead what I mean is sellers have what I call emotional equity. So most of the time, unless they've sold a business or bought a business in the past, this will be their first real exit. And usually that means this is their first real business, like that went big and big enough where they can sell it, right? And so the seller overvalues their business because they have all this emotional baggage with it. Like, this is what allowed me to quit my job, travel the world, spend time with my kids, do a pretty crazy life in comparison to most like 9-to-5 people, right? So they overvalue their business. And when they if they don't use me, if they just go directly to the market and to go to a buyer, often they get like extremely mad or upset. Like, I can't believe this buyer offered me such a low ball deal. But what they don't realize is that buyers valuing their business on a much colder arithmetic because they don't have that emotional equity, right? Like, your P&L is the P&L. Like, that's what it is to them at the end of the day. And now there's arguments for audience building and integration, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, they just don't have that same emotional equity. So if a seller comes to me, that's one of the first things I talk to them through to make sure they have realistic expectations of what they're worth. And if they can get over that, then I can help them become a millionaire, right? That's the good side. Once you come down to reality, like, well, yeah, you're not worth 7 million, but you can still get 5 million, which is quite a lot, right? So valuations is the first big stumbling block, is finding out what you're worth.
Walk me through then this process of getting a store listed for sale with you.
Sure. So if someone wanted to sell with us, the process is pretty streamlined. So what you do, you just go submit your store for sale with us. You go to, empireflippers.com, right? And you'd submit it for vetting. And at that point, you sign nothing with us. What our team will do is go through your entire books. We'll rebuild your P&L, because that's another stumbling block a lot of e-commerce entrepreneurs have, as you might imagine. I think we actually talked about that offline a bit, but P&Ls is often a struggle. Entrepreneurs tend to be creative and all over the place, and thus not the best bean counters. So we do that for you and make sure everything is in the right format, present the business, give you the valuation. And if you like the valuation, if you like what you see, great. That's when you come onto our marketplace. We only have 2 months of exclusivity. So if we don't sell it within 2 months, you're more than welcome to take it off and try somewhere else. But in most cases, like if you have a good business, if you're not sold by the end of 2 months, then you're having like really good conversations by the end of 2 months, in my experience. So from there, or once you're on the marketplace and my team markets to our whole list, right, and to all our channels, our sales team will come in to help you negotiate with a buyer. And that's like a big part of our thing, is we try to make up like win-win-wins, right? We want the seller to walk away with life-changing money, but we still want the buyer to walk away getting a good deal where they didn't like just give the guy life-changing money and they win in massive amount of debt, right? We don't want that. And which ultimately lets us win, because both sides win. And our sellers often become our buyers once they get that liquidity and once they get paid out. So it's very common for, say, let's say you sold a $2 million store with me, to take $1 million and buy 1 or 2 stores from me to grow your own asset flywheel, which is what I call the strategy. After watching a lot of my customers do it over the years, you basically just build up a business, sell it, buy a couple more from me, build those up, sell it, and keep the process going, right?
We got to talk about valuation. That's probably the thing people are curious about. What factors are critical in the valuation, and then what are typical multiples?
There's 2 things that a seller needs to know. One, your business is ultimately worth what anyone's willing to pay for it. So like all valuations are guessworks at the end of the day, even more so than say like real estate comparables, because every business is quite unique. So keep that in mind. Like if you are selling to a buyer that is another entrepreneur like you, then they're going to be a lot more pragmatic typically in how they value your business. If you're selling to someone who I say has a swimming pool for a P&L, like say a multinational public company, then your little $1 million business might not even be a blip on their radar. But when it comes to your valuation, the biggest thing that we look for is your SDE, your EBITDA. Like I'm sure you've been around this crowd as well, with you being so entrenched in the industry. But I've been around a lot of Shopify store owners where they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I'm making like 2 million in rev." Like they're like acting like they're really big stuff. But then you find out that their net profit, like they're barely breaking even. Like they can barely pay themselves their own salary because their whole unit economics are messed up, right? So that's not a good sign if you're a seller. You need to have a good unit economics, right? So all valuations, at least in our area in SMBs, are going to be valued on that SDE and EBITDA. Like what is your actual net profit after all is said and done? And we look at your 12-month average as your kind of like your baseline for that. And then we also look year over year. Like, are you growing? Are you stagnating? Are you declining? You can sell a business in all 3 scenarios, but your multiple is going to be drastically different in all 3 scenarios. Speaking of stumbling blocks, so this is another issue that people get into. Like, let's say you have a Shopify store that's growing rapidly year over year, and you want to sell the business. Like that's your goal, but you keep saying, and this is a very common line I hear a lot of entrepreneurs say at every conference I go to, that you will hear the entrepreneurs say like, well, there's more juice for me to squeeze before I sell the business. But this is a massive mistake in my view, because if you're growing very, very fast, that is the best time you'll ever have to sell your business. If you reach a peak, like that you reach the top of that growth, really what that peak represents, if you can't keep growing, is the period of stagnation, where your business has now grown to a certain point where you got to start pivoting and reworking everything so you can get to that next peak of growth, right? Because your business is just reaching one of those natural bridges in its growth cycle. So if you sold the business on the way up, not only it'd be way easier for you to sell the business, but you're going to get a better multiple too, because buyers, on one end, they want to buy something that is less risky, but on the other end, they want to buy growth. So if they see something that's growing, they're like, oh, I better do this now because I want the growth that this trend line is pointing out, right? So that is another thing we look at. So those are the 2 big things, is like your profit and what scenario are you in, broadly speaking, year growth, stagnation, or decline.
And then if someone's buying it, are those the metrics they're going to focus on?
Yeah,
like year over year change.
Pretty big ones for their multiples. So there's a bunch of other stuff that goes into it too, but these are the broad strokes. Like if you fix your profit and you fix your growth, most of the other stuff that affect your multiple is you're probably also doing it right. So like other stuff that affects your multiple, what I talked about earlier, product diversity, revenue diversity, right? Not everything is one product. Like if your hero product makes up like 50% of your store, hey, that's fine. But if it's making up like 80% of your store, and say you have like 30 SKUs, that's a lot less fine, because that's a lot of sitting inventory probably, right? A lot of dead inventory happening. Same with traffic channels. If you want to have a diversity of channels, I recommend 2. Most entrepreneurs I see struggle to even do 2. Like most businesses, we sell or 1 channel, to be honest. So like, I'm not saying you can't sell a business like that, but if you want to have the best multiple, have 2 to 3 pretty profitable built out acquisition channels as well.
So I want diversity in my catalog. I want to be showing year over year growth, and I want multiple acquisition channels, multiple traffic channels. It can't just be like only Google, only Facebook.
Yeah.
And so if
I'd also Sorry, I just real quick. I'm sure I'm going to bring it up again, but I also highly, highly recommend for everyone listening to this to really focus on your email list. That is some of the most valuable, like the most valuable asset. Like if you only focus on one thing, like if you want to add a second, marketing channel, acquisition channel, make it email, because email does a lot of different things for your multiple. It's traffic, it helps your conversions, and you can use that data to bring in other traffic through, lookalikes, or just understanding the psychographics and demographics of your audience better, right? So email is like also a big, big, big cornerstone. It's great for launching products or even launching new marketing channels, like your own YouTube channel or whatever, if you have good engagement on social, right? So email is also what I consider a key pillar for your evaluation.
All right, so that's four things I got to, because
Yes.
my question was going to be what are the top three things if I want to maximize that selling price.
Email kind of fits like all of them because it's like it does so many different things for you. So I always like to pull it out separately a little bit.
Okay, and that make a lot of this is like just generally good business advice in addition to being
that's what I mean. A lot of it's common sense.
Not long ago we were in a position where we were discussing an acquisition, and in going through that process and that preparation, ended up falling in love with my business all over again. Do you see this for people like they're like, all right, thought I was going to sell it. Yeah, now that somebody's interested, it's mine. I want it.
Yes, I do see that. So there's a joke in M&A. I've been honored to meet like people who do way bigger deals than I do, like in private equity, investment bankers and stuff like that. They're doing like $200 million deals, right? I talked to them, and there's this common joke that a M&A deal dies 3 times before you actually get it done. So it's either the buyer or the seller that's going to kill it on that first time, and then they kind of kill it together on the second time, and then maybe the original buyer who it died on the first time, he comes around, and then the seller's like, no more. So this is like quite common because one of the most interesting things I think is, as an entrepreneur, like you're in your business all day long, right? And there's a bit of myopic, like tunnel vision that happens to you where you don't see all the great things that your business has anymore because you're too busy in the weeds fixing all the holes in the ship, right? Like trying to make it run better. So when a buyer comes in and they're a little bit more glassy eyed, if they really like what they're seeing, that can really inspire you to go forth and rebuild your business. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with pulling out a deal like that. Like I think selling a business is a very personal decision as well as an economic decision. It's one of the biggest personal and biggest economic decisions you'll make in your career as an entrepreneur, in my view. So, like, I'm not saying that like that's a wrong thing to do, but I would recommend like you really do some soul searching before you decide to go sell your business, because it's not necessarily an easy process, and it's a small world out there. But you want to keep buyers happy, because a lot of times buyers and sellers end up becoming business partners after the deal too.
So tell me about how the purchase is structured. Like often there you can have an earn out deal where it's like, oh, I got this multiple million offer, but it's really paid out over like 3 years.
Yep.
What are these, what are terms of a typical sale like?
So it depends on the size of the deal. So if you're a very small e-commerce store, say underneath 500K valuation, you'd expect majority of that all cash or completely all cash up front. Now, where the deals become trickier is when you get, I say the hardest area to sell an e-commerce business is 500,000 to $1 million in terms of your valuation, because it's just slightly too big for a lot of the like upstart entrepreneurs to just like go lay down that kind of capital unless they have other businesses already kind of firing off. And it's too small for a lot of what I call the financial wizards, which are the private equity and the strategics, to come and look at you. So most real deal structuring happens above the 7-figure range. And if you are like, say, low 7 figures, your deal structure will probably be pretty simple. Like you can expect 80% upfront, 20% paid out, usually over a 2-year period. It depends on how they pay it out, but usually it's going to be like quarterly payments. So or sometimes there's not even an earnout, it's just seller finance. So those two things sometimes get confused. So seller finance is usually you're giving the loan to them at either 0% interest or very low interest, and they're going to pay you no matter what happens with the business, right? Earnout, on the other hand, like the business must grow at a certain pace in order for you to get paid out. Now, most of the time, earnouts are very reasonable. So most of earnouts I have seen have gotten paid. But my advice to any seller, whether you use me or, go off your own or someone else, like if you get an earnout deal, make sure the upfront amount is what you're happy with. Like you should walk away with that money and like, I am so glad I did that deal, even if this other stuff doesn't come through. Now, the other stuff probably will come through, like it usually does, but you never want to do a deal where you're unhappy with that upfront amount because you never know. There's no guarantees in business, right? I've seen a guy, he bought a $3 million business from me. And now in this case, the seller, or I think it was a $2 million business, the seller was pretty happy because he got his whole payment. But then the buyer, for whatever reason, like just put the website under construction and the website never got out of under construction. It's been under construction for like 5 years. Like who knows? Like what happened? Who knows? The seller got out fine, but when if that was an earnout, probably wouldn't have been so fine, right? So you never know what you're going to get. Now I say like I want to preface that because sellers might hear that like I'll never accept an earnout. And I was just talking to a guy, he had a $5 million business, and he was telling me that. I was like, okay, well, you'll never sell your business then. Like, which is better, 0 or 3.5 million right now? Like, with the potential to make it another 1.5 million over 2 years, right? Like, because if you do no earnout, then you also get no money. You have no liquidity. So the choice is kind of yours. You got to remain flexible but stern, is what I always tell my sellers.
I do like that advice of like be happy with that first earnout amount, because that was the advice I got too. Was like, hey, often those earnouts don't come to fruition, because you don't know what's going to happen, and so you better be able to rely on that initial payment. Are there any other red flag sellers should look out for to ensure a smooth ride?
Sure. So on earnouts in particular, this happens once you get above like low seven figures. Say you're like a $3-5 million plus kind of business, or like that 13 million one we sold, right? That's when structures start getting more complicated. And we personally had saved a seller. He like really fought us on this, and like makes sense why he would fight us on this. But we had this deal. I think it was a $2.8 million deal, and he got this earnout. And the earnout looked really, really good. So one of the things about earnouts is if you hit the hurdle, like that they set for you, you can make more money than what your business is actually worth. So in his case, 2.8 million, he would really make like 3.5 if it hits all of the earnout targets. Great, right? But the thing is, he was dealing with very savvy like private equity types, and these guys have an unfair advantage on sellers. Whereas the seller is selling their first business ever, that private equity guy, like you're just like the business of the week for them, right? Like they do this all the time, so they're just a lot more skilled than you, which is why I always, shameless plug, I would use a broker if you'd never sold a business, just to watch out for these traps. But we realized that earnout, like the growth rate was so extreme. Like this business, no way is it going to make it, right? And so we told him like, don't accept the deal. And gladly he didn't. And we were able to restructure the deal. So that's one thing to watch out for on these structures is what is the wording? What percentages are we talking about? When is the payout? All that kind of stuff. And if you're not using a broker, I highly, highly recommend that you use a lawyer that's familiar with M&A transactions, so they can like dispel the myth of like what is actually being said in the contract and break it out to you in layman terms.
And okay, we've been talking almost entirely about if you are selling your business. I want to switch gears to advice for buyers. Similarly, what advice would you give a Shopify merchant, someone who has experience looking to buy? They want to expand, they got some cash on hand, and they're looking to buy another Shopify store. That like, I'm going to apply my learnings, I'll scale this one too.
Sure. Yeah. So what you said earlier, I 100% agree. I think buying a business is so much faster than building one, and so much, a lot of ways safer if you buy big enough. So I'm a big fan of buying. In terms of things to think about as a buyer, so you think you would have all the power because you have the money, but in M&A, it's actually the other way around. The seller of the high quality business is the darling at the ball. All the buyers want the good quality business. They're all going to come competing. This is a big reason why big buyers don't like using brokers, because we do create a marketplace of competition, right? So like they know that they're going to have to pay a fair market wage or above fair market for that business, right? Because of the competition. So as a buyer, you got to remember you are the salesman in the deal. Like you need to sell the seller on selling to you, like, because money is just a commodity. Everyone has money, and more people have more money than you, no matter how much money you have, because like we've dealt with private equity that have holdings in the billions, right? Like very few people have that kind of auto sitting around, right? So knowing that, you need to win the seller over. And how you win the seller over is find out what they want. Like, if you talk to a seller, like, why are you selling the business? Like, oh, I have another project. Okay, but why are you really selling the business? Like, oh, I'm just like, emotionally burnt out. I can't get it out of my head, even though I'm like automated this business, like where it takes 5 hours a week on my part, but I'm always thinking about it constantly. I want to think about this. Like, great. Well, what do you need to stop thinking about it? And you get like, you drill down is the why, like find out the real reason why they are selling and structure your offer to meet that why. Like, okay, this is my minimum I need to meet in order to get the seller to say yes to me, right? So like, that's how you start structuring your offer. Now, when you come out with your offer, you don't want to go to the max of what you're willing to pay. You still want to try to get a good deal, but you want to bring like the buyer's incentive is buy as low as possible, right? But at the same time, you need to meet what the seller wants. So you can give that deal and see what the seller says. You'll probably go back to counter offer, which is very, very common. Usually I see between 3 to 7 rounds of counter offers, or just going back and forth, like, no, I want this, no, I want that. Okay, this. Okay, all right. There's the compromise, right? So that's a big thing. When you are negotiating, I tell this to sellers too, but it's even more important for a buyer because buyers are the salesmen in this case. You need to approach all negotiations as a collaboration, not a showdown. This is not like an old cowboy movie who can draw the pistols the quickest, right, to get the best deal. Like, your goal is to give the seller what they want in such a way where you can get what you want. And that's often done in deal structuring, which is a big reason why it's so common above 7 figures. Because you think about it from a buyer perspective, like if they paid that guy like $5 million all up front, they're basically just buying the honor of losing $5 million if it all goes wrong, right? So like, that's a big part of why they do these kind of structures. And if you want to be a master buyer, become really good at negotiations, really good at giving the seller what they want, and understanding all the different types of deal structures that can facilitate what the seller wants, right? Like, for example, we had a guy, he bought a business from us, and the seller's price was just unreachable by the buyer, not by a lot, by a little bit. And so what the buyer did, he noticed like, okay, well, you have all this dead inventory. So if I give you this money, and like, he was thinking inside, if I give him this money, I can liquidate this section of his inventory. And then I forget the second thing he did with the inventory, but basically made up more or less the difference. And he made a deal with the seller, like, look, I'm not going to pay for the inventory up front. I'm just going to pay for it as we sell it. So like, that was his other thing. So that way he didn't have to lay out all the capital. And so I was like, well, that's reasonable, So you're always looking for ways to compromise. So as a buyer, you know tons of different ways to get a deal done. That also means you know tons of different ways to get the seller what they want. So you're more likely to win the deal.
I think that's the interesting thing that people don't realize about buying and selling a business. Like, it is not just a single transaction. It's often, a much more complicated thing that happens in a series of transactions after quite a bit of back and forth. Any other tips on, if I'm buying, how do I ensure I'm going to get a profitable and worthwhile purchase here? So, the others you said, like, well, on the selling side, you're like, well, here's the red flags to watch out for. All right, if I'm buying, what are my red flags?
So your red flags as a buyer is if a business is growing too fast and too short of a timeline. Like, growth is great, but the biggest killer of businesses in a lot of ways isn't so much not making money, but having too much revenue and not profit, right? So you're growing so quickly in this short time span, that could be a fad, right? This is another reason why having diverse products is good. Another red flag is buying too small. And this isn't necessarily a red flag. It's just a cautionary thing you should consider as a buyer. So if you're looking at buying a business that's lower than, say, $500,000, this can still be a really, really good business. It could be great, but it's a very fragile business because it's very small. So if a storm happens to it, it will be harder for it to kind of like pivot through the hurricane versus like the big cargo ships of the industry, right? So that's another thing to consider is size. One thing is, if anything is wrong with the P&L, the profit and loss statement, if something is wrong here, and this is why I tell sellers to get a bookkeeper who understands e-commerce or use us, whichever way you prefer. But if something is wrong with your P&L, or the P&L of the business you're looking at rather, then this is a giant red flag. Like, this should be the most important document in the entire business, like profit and loss statement, the cash statement, all the different financial statements, right? If something's wrong here, and they're trying to sell the business, so they should be even more incentive for it to be correct. like you need to double check everything. So how you do this is you make sure, if you're not using a broker, how you do this is you want proof of earnings. And now the proof of earnings report is pretty expensive. So again, if you're buying a smaller business, it's often not even worth to get a proof of earnings statement. So other ways you can do it is actually looking at their bank statements to making sure that the money that they are saying that's coming in is actually coming in on their bank statements. So that's another way. Looking at their actual taxes, which is often not very helpful because a lot of entrepreneurs do a bunch of different stuff to minimize their taxes, which leads to SBA often not being as good of a vehicle as people think. Because if you try to buy a business with an SBA and the entrepreneur is like a cunning tax minimizer, the SBA loan is not going to work out unless they reconciliate their taxes, which is a whole other issue. But those are some of the big red flags. So anything that the seller tells you, even like if you get the best impression of the seller, and most of the time the seller's not being nefarious, even if there is a mistake in their P&L, it's just so many different things going on. It's easy to miss something, right? So the seller's most likely not trying to pull a fast one on over you, but they might not even realize that they did pull one over you because they think the business is doing this too, and then they're proven wrong, which is something that's happened to us. So like we'd get a lot of these Amazon FBA businesses come to our marketplace, and they would go through our vetting process and they realize, oh shit, I'm not making nearly as much money as I thought I was because they weren't as clued into their books as they thought they were until we started looking at it, right? So those are some quick red flags to consider.
Okay, you're in an interesting position where you see a lot of these sales happen, and so you're kind of privy to market trends. So what trends are you seeing currently in regards to selling Shopify stores?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So we led the trend on the FBA aggregators, right? Like I often joke that the Amazon FBA aggregators were like our stepchildren because we were the very first broker to sell FBA businesses before Amazon even knew you could. Like we used to have to call up Amazon and tell them like, no, you legally cannot stop this entrepreneur from selling their business. And like, oh, right.
Well, they tried to stop you?
Oh, yeah. So what was happening was they have that policy against selling FBA accounts. And what their language there, what the context of that is like fraudsters who are doing like a bunch of black hat shit on Amazon where like they need to go buy a new account because they keep burning through theirs, right? And that's what they really meant about not selling it. But the low level customer service, they didn't have no idea about what we were talking about. So we had to go up the chain, get these written letters of approval before we even started the transfer process with FBA. We pioneered the listing transfer. We pioneered the account takeovers. Like it got to a point where like I came so close to getting a guest post written on Amazon's blog because I had worked so closely with them at this point, which was really, really cool. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. That would have been a great backlink for SEO. But yeah, so in terms of answer your question, yes, I've seen a lot of this stuff and a lot of the hype, or not the hype, I should say, the hunger for businesses has moved away from FBA, and with good reason, because what I mentioned earlier, the risk, right? Like with Amazon, you have a massive platform risk, right? Great businesses, but a lot of those businesses, they only sell on Amazon. They only have one marketing channel. So if somebody has a marketing channel to Amazon, they could be screwed. So what I'm seeing now is buyers are extremely hungry for high quality DTC businesses because the secret is like all those aggregators, they bought the FBA businesses thinking that they could build a direct to consumer brand using those products by taking it off of Amazon. But it doesn't really work that way. It works the other way around. Like if you build a successful direct consumer Shopify store, it's much easier for you to be successful on Amazon with that same product than it is the other way around. And you've already figured out the hardest part, which is those direct funnels. That's the thing that Amazon FBA people just don't know how to do as well because they have the spoils of Amazon's traffic, but they also have the chains of Amazon, right? So that's the big thing I'm seeing is high quality Shopify DTC brands with good funnels, good traffic. And a lot of these buyers, what they want to do is they want to come in and acquire that and then use their connections with, say, like retail distribution to open up a bunch of other channels as well, in addition to just, natural scaling through economies of scale. So
do you have any future predictions? You've been doing this a long time. Where do you see e-commerce heading or Shopify or this market?
E-commerce store owners that have it figured out, I think, are the most sustainable and scalable and sellable business probably for the next foreseeable few years. Like probably 3 to 5 years, they'll be the most sellable businesses, even more so than SaaS, in my view. And the reason why I say that is because AI is destroying everyone. Like it's coming for everything, right? So like my affiliate site friends, like a big part of why they're feeling so much pain is because of AI, because like it's destroy the Google algorithm as Google's like panicking to catch up with OpenAI. There's just chaos and blood on the streets if you're an affiliate site owner. And when it comes to SaaS, the same pain that my affiliate friends are feeling, I think they're going to feel that pain too, probably towards the end of next year, when a lot of the informational queries from SEO start disappearing or becoming more threatened by AI. And because AI is just going to start creating SaaS businesses out of thin air now. Like they don't need a coder. Like the thing that was your moat that you needed all this VC money, now a guy just like sitting in his room can make it in an afternoon using ChatGPT or Devin, right? So in terms of sustainability, I think e-commerce and agencies are in a very luxurious position, because when a new AI tool comes out, the e-commerce entrepreneur, all they have to do is like, hey, call up their customer support. How do I import all my data over to that new tool, the best and brightest tool, right? So e-commerce stores and agency owners get to use like all the best tools that are going to be coming out of here, versus the other business models. I think they're going to have a harder time with it.
Well, I hope you're right. There's AI. You're right. AI moves so quickly, and there's just a lot of anxiety about it. And I viewed it as like, hey, it's another tool, so stay on top of your tools, and then you then could take advantage of that. Like, why do you have to be the one who gets punished by it? You could be the one that takes advantage of it.
So we had this meeting with the other higher ups over at EF, like, why aren't we focusing our marketing on AI? And like, look, I'll sell an AI business. It's like the easiest one to sell right now because it's so hyped up. Like I like, we got a $2 million one in vetting right now, but I don't want to build any marketing around it because it's just not sustainable. Like I have a friend last year who built a chatbot company on AI and on OpenAI's API, right? Built one man show, $25,000, like basically pure profit. I think he's spending like maybe $500 as expenses, like next to nothing, right?
I like
and
this
then
business.
OpenAI came out with their custom GPTs and chatbots to start his business overnight. Like, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to compete against this multi-billion-dollar behemoth? Like, you can't. So, like, if you're building AI or SaaS, I would recommend build it to the point where you think you can get the liquidity you want and sell it. Because AI might make it look a lot less appealing in a few years. As an e-commerce entrepreneur, you can be agnostic. You can just switch the label to whenever the other one is better. If you're agnostic with this stuff, like you can just keep using the best of the best and not have to worry about this extremely brutal red ocean that these SaaS and AI people are going to be dealing with in the coming months and years. So that's why I mean about e-commerce. I'm pretty bullish on e-commerce overall.
I saw that there's an Empire Flippers app, for a Shopify app. Tell me about this.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited by this. It's something I've wanted to do for literal years. So we finally got it done. It's a Shopify app. You can go to the Shopify store. If you just search like Empire Flippers valuation tool, it should come up. And basically what it does, it sits inside of your Shopify dashboard, and you can enter in your profit margins and a couple other numbers. And then it's pulling in your real revenue numbers combined with our valuation tool API. And it gives you a rolling rough estimation of what your business is worth every single day. So it's updating constantly as you grow. Yeah. And like, as I said earlier in the show, like valuations is like one of the hardest things for sellers to overcome and really understand, right? So here you have a free valuation, and it's based off 2,000 businesses we sold.
At the start of the show, you said you were doing this SEO writing business and you were burned out on it. But you're like, what choice do I have? You just keep going. Do you experience burnout now, or are you happy with what you do?
It's a tough one to answer, man. I think the last couple of years has been tough because the M&A market's been tough, to be honest. Like, we saw the $1 billion aggregators crash and burn, which had a massive ripple effect across everything. I'm too busy right now, which isn't great. We just hired a guy to help me. Probably going to hire another guy soonish to help me further. But in general, man, like, I used to work 18 hours a day across North Dakota, Alaska, Gulf of Mexico. Like the guy I replaced. So when I was 18, when I got on an oil rig, how I got that job was the guy who I was taking over lost the lower half of his body in an auger. Like he wasn't that much older than me. He's like 2 years older than me. In North Dakota, I wasn't on the rig where this happened, but the driller, he was high on acid and ran this guy through with a 5,000-pound top drive, which is the giant thing that holds up the drill pipe, right? I almost lost this finger in the oil field saving this newbie guy from almost getting his hand completely chopped off by a piston pump. So like when I think about the oil field versus when I think about today, like, yeah, I'm busy, like it's tough, but it's fun tough. Like versus that is like, this is nightmare tough. So when it comes to that old job versus what I do now, I'm much, much happier. I love helping entrepreneurs. Like my dad is an entrepreneur and my dad is my hero. So I kind of feel like I'm helping versions of him like get like really level up their own life. Because the moment you exit your business, like Joe gets the start of your real business. Like if you suddenly have been spending, you've been spending years working on this thing, and it's not like just because your business is $5 million, like you're a millionaire. Like you're putting all this money back into the business, right? Though he had this buyer, he always joke, I love all these e-commerce entrepreneurs. They're all young and really rich and broke as hell because they're just reinvesting constantly, right? So when you get to sell that $5 million business, you are a millionaire now. Your life changes. Like you have whole new questions that weren't even possibilities as questions just moments before that. And I think that is just a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. So I love it.
I'm so glad I asked that question. All right, where can we go to learn more about you and selling a Shopify business on Empire Flippers?
Yeah, so I have a niche site blog called empireflippers.com. Come check it out. So if you want to sell your site, we have valuation tools and sell your site, or you can register for our marketplace and check out businesses if you're more on the buy side. If you want to reach out to me personally, it's just Greg at empireflippers.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
This has been informative and helpful and inspiring, and I am so glad you were able to join me today. Gregory Elfrink, empireflippers.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, man. It was a pleasure.